So we've been pretty distracted in recent weeks with the political turmoil and upheavals in the markets, and we've been unpicking them week by week with lots of bonus episodes and bringing in all the experts. But, meanwhile, the real world has been rumbling on. And this is a story we've been meaning to bring you for some time. It's about equality and equal pay here in the City of London. It's an issue that affects so many people working around here and all around the world, and really does affect their lives. And there's been a case going on now for some time involving one of the big global banks, BNP Paribas, and a light has been shone on the practices at the bank, which has lessons, we think, to tell all of us about the future for equality here in the city.
I'm Francine Lacqua.
And I'm David Merritt.
And this is In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the stories and the voices at the heart of the City of London.
So this week, we are taking a deep look at the pay discrepancy between men and women working in finance. And there was a verdict in a London court case that could shine even more light on what is actually still a widening gap.
Yeah, for the record, hell hath no fury as a woman paid less. Jonathan Browning, legal reporter here in London, joins us. So Jonathan, you're going to help us unpack this very specific case of a broker at BNP Paribas in London and the equal pay audit that was ordered as part of the verdict in her equal pay suit. Before we get the details, let's just paint the picture of where we are now when it comes to equal pay in the city.
Yeah, because the very idea of women being paid less than their male colleagues should have gone out years ago, but we know that that's not the case. So tell us about the reality of the situation now, and really that this verdict's not so surprising.
It's not, in one sense. I mean, the UK became the biggest country to zoom in on this explosive topic of the pay gap between men and women when it asked for mandatory reporting on wage differences in 2018. But the point is that was a fairly blunt instrument. It shows that men were paid a median of 9.7% more than women. That's what men and women earn on average. It's not a comparison of like-for-like roles. It highlights the extent to which women have been underrepresented. It's all we have until now.
Is it worse in the finance industry?
It is. Women in the finance industry make significantly less than men. The pay gap is especially wide in investment banking, where some of the highest paid employees work, and they tend to be men.
But just to clarify on the data, you say it's about the median pay, isn't it, Jonathan? So it's not showing you, say, what someone doing the same job is showing. What it's showing a little bit as well is that there are fewer women in senior positions, which are the higher paid jobs as well, right? That's part of the problem.
Very much so. And most employers are very keen to say this doesn't mean equal pay. It's not a comparison of like for like. This is about the averages that men and women earn, and has been, as I say, like all that any employee has to rely on, because that's all we've had so far.
But this case, what was different about this case? What sort of light did it shine on the issue here at BNP Paribas?
So the big thing is the fact that the verdict at the end and the remedy that was ordered will go into some serious detail about equal pay. But this is a case about Stacey Macken.
Hello, I'm Stacey Macken,
who was a prime brokerage manager at BNP Paribas. I spoke with Stacey Macken and her barrister, Sheila Aly, in the Bloomberg studio about a month ago to talk through these issues. She was a 16-year veteran of the bank, a New Zealander who'd relocated to London. She called this like her dream job. But she started to fear, perhaps, that she was being paid less than her colleagues for the same amount of work.
BNP Paribas were paying a male in the same role 40% more in salary and 7 times the bonus for no good reason. All I can say is that I felt very, very let down by the bank. I'd raised a genuine complaint, and HR should have investigated it properly. But instead, they made a conscious decision to side with male discriminators and cover up the discrimination.
And to be clear, this is a prime brokerage job at a big investment bank. So this is a high paid job, right? We're talking serious money here.
We are. I think her pay was slightly north of already 100,000. But that's not, in this sense, the point. It's the fact that a colleague, an exact comparator, was being paid more.
So this is not only about pay discrimination, right? It's equal pay violation, discrimination, laddish culture that came out in the trial, as I imagine people submitted evidence. And it's also females in HR running a bit of a sham grievance.
It is. And initially, a lot of the laddish culture got the headlines. There were some pretty appalling episodes where at one point in time Stacey Macken came to work the next morning to find a witch's hat on her desk. And that had been, tribunal found, left there by a group of male colleagues who had been out drinking. When she made comments and complaints, there was a sort of familiar refrain of, "Not now, Stacey, not now, Stacey." And it became kind of a thing. So that was what got the headlines perhaps initially. But the actual meat of the case, the concern was around equal pay.
I think if you are working in an environment where women are belittled, then that's a pretty good indication that there is an underlying problem in gender pay.
And the FCA themselves have made a great play about the fact that in a culture where sexist behaviour is tolerated, is not dealt with in any way, then other problems fester and misconduct is much more likely to happen.
So what happens now? There was, £2 million being awarded to her in January, but actually the judge went a step further.
Yeah, she did. The award of the money is a significant sum. We think it's probably in the top 10 of all employment tribunal awards. When a discrimination claim is made, there is in theory no upper limit, but this award stands out for the size of it as much as anything else. But even more important is this essentially an order, a requirement from the tribunal for an equal pay audit. That had never happened before.
I requested the equal pay audit as part of my remedy because I became aware that there was a wider problem. But basically, I just wanted to make sure that no other woman at BNP would have to go through what I went through. I mean, it's been 50 odd years since the Equal Pay Act, and yet women still have not reached pay parity. And in my opinion, the UK regulations don't go far enough. I think every large employer who has a material pay gap should have to publish the underlying data. Otherwise, we're just not going to make any progress.
As we were saying earlier, that's not just going to show you what the median amounts are. That's going to look like for like people in jobs throughout the firm, whether men and women are being paid equally.
Top to bottom, the whole way through the London branch. It's an absolutely enormous undertaking and something, that employers might have done and kept private. This time round, we understand that's to be made public. And that's the whole point, right? Because that's when it will have an impact, because people can look across and see whether or not.
And that's just BNP Paribas are going to have to do that. Any other banks going to follow suit?
At the moment, this is just for BNP Paribas, and they have just completed the audit. They've sent it to the tribunal. But we've started to see other claimants in employment tribunal cases in the financial services industry asking for that too. It becomes a remedy beyond the kind of personal award of damages, something bigger than that. And that's something now that other claimants are starting to ask of the tribunal too.
So what's been BNP's response?
So they've never appealed any of the decisions, both at the what's called the liability hearing, where they discovered the issues, and then in the remedy hearing either. They accept, in a sense, that it doesn't mean to say they didn't fight it tooth and nail. They fought it tooth and nail. But at the end, they've been very clear, and they said that we fell short in our duty to Ms. Macken. They're considering the tribunal's judgment to see what they can learn, and they have conducted this pay audit.
So BNP Paribas were showcasing themselves throughout this whole process as some sort of champion of equality.
Even literally as the time the discrimination hearing was happening, Jean-Laurent Bonnafé, the CEO, was publicly championing this he-for-she campaign that the bank was leading.
As a new he-for-she thematic champion and the CEO of a large bank, as a citizen and a father, I'm personally committed to drive forward the empowerment of women. At BNP Paribas, we have made the 17...
He was named a partner in the campaign, pledged to take affirmative action to combat discrimination, but the result was literally they were also fighting tooth and nail in a London employment tribunal.
Surely Stacey Macken must feel pretty frustrated by that outcome.
I think she does.
I think it's interesting that they said that they have worked ambitiously on gender equality for 20 years. And there's a huge difference between ambition and action.
And their defence was what? Were they trying to discredit Stacey Macken, or what was their defence?
Yeah, initially they didn't even admit that there was this discrepancy. It was only through the litigation process that Macken discovered that a male colleague in an equivalent role was being paid 25% more than she was. And that discrepancy only got wider as this male colleague received bonuses and a special allowance. They said it wasn't comparable, but the fundamental point was that his bonus was more than 5 times Stacey Macken's. She, I think, also feels that it was noteworthy that none of the individuals at BNP Paribas were in any way disciplined, and that's still the case.
None of the discriminators have been disciplined, despite this being defined as gross misconduct by the compliance department, and despite BNP publicly stating on their website that they are banning discrimination of all types. Now, what I can tell you from the remedy hearing, we discovered that all discriminators received their bonuses after the judgment against them.
I just wonder, Jonathan, none of this is really surprising, right? That these things happen. It's shocking, but not surprising. We all hear stories about either sexual harassment or women being treated differently at banks. Is it overall changing, or is it changing at such a glacial pace that actually doesn't make much difference?
Something like this has a real impact because it is a discernible result from a individual's case. This is a tool, this is a document. We don't yet know how it's going to be made available. At the moment, the tribunal has the audit and it is considering it. But we've never been in this situation before, so we don't quite know how it's going to be released. This is something kind of tangible. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, what makes it stand out.
And, to Francine's point, it isn't that surprising, is it? There must be people, possibly people listening to this podcast who've experienced laddish behaviour in the workplace who might suspect that their colleagues are getting paid more than them for the same job. Are we going to see many more cases now brought forward or coming to light?
Well, it's true. I asked the same question of Sheila Aly, Stacey Macken's barrister. How widespread is this problem of equal pay, especially in the city?
It's more widespread than people would think. Nobody walks into a job thinking, I'm being discriminated against. Well, hopefully nobody walks in with that view. But the fact is, it happens. I talk to a number of women who don't know what the pay gap is. And it's difficult to tell them what to do. They're acting on a suspicion that someone is treated differently. And then they have to bring a claim based on that. And it's only really then at the disclosure stage of the claim when the employer is forced, because they have a duty from the tribunal to disclose everything that's either helpful or adverse to the case for them. And most of the time they'll be right. But how many people would really even get to that stage?
As I say, I think we'll certainly start seeing these equal pay audits being requested of tribunals. It's a power, I think, that no one really realised was available to them. But whether or not that has a bigger impact, I think it puts the pressure on BNP Paribas first, and then you can be sure that every single HR and employment relations team is now aware that is a remedy that could be requested of any other bank. And they want to
get ahead of that now, right? To actually get their shop in order, right? Before they're forced to reveal the numbers. Right?
Because the point about this particular request was the tribunal didn't believe that BNP Paribas had looked at this issue in enough detail. Right. It said, and BNP Paribas said it had. And then it was asked the question of whether or not it considered bonuses in that audit. And they said no. And so then the tribunal said, well, we simply think there are are quite likely to be other people in that situation, and therefore we need you to conduct this equal pay audit from top to bottom to include bonuses.
Jonathan, you spoke to her. So did she feel vindicated? Or is it still very difficult for a woman to stand up and say, well, actually, I'm going to go to a tribunal, because then you potentially fear that you could be unemployable afterwards?
Yeah, this was a grueling process. The first hearings were back in 2019. Stacey Macken basically did all the work as far as the litigation herself. She had a barrister to advocate for her at the actual trial, at the actual tribunal hearing, but she did all the background. She didn't have solicitors to do the grunt work. She did that all.
It's very difficult for women to finance cases like this, especially when you're paid 40% less in salary and 7 times less in bonus. And I'll say the only way I survived it was by being a litigant in person for the majority of the time. And what that means is I was managing the case myself behind the scenes, and Sheila was representing me at the hearings. But if I'd had to hire a solicitor to do that type of work and to do all the communications with the bank, then it would have cost me a fortune and I wouldn't have been able to take this forward.
I think she would never have said that she was someone who wanted to be initially that advocate for equal pay. I think she's somewhat unwilling to be in that position, but has found herself in that position as someone who is a bit of a standard bearer and is now kind of someone who perhaps can advocate.
It's been quite a battle, a David and Goliath battle, if you will. But here I am 5 years later. I've come out of it successful. And, I'm proud that I can help other women and champion them. And to the women at BNP, I guess one thing I would say is remember that you're in a power position now. We've got this equal pay audit for you. You're going to have transparency that you've never had before. You know that the regulators have already been into BNP on the back of my judgment. And the FCA are now requiring BNP to log all complaints. So I hope it gives them the confidence to go out and get the equal pay that they're entitled to.
Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week.
But in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review, and subscribe. This episode was hosted by me, Francine Lacqua, with Dave Merritt. It was produced by Summer Sadi, with editing and sound design by Blake Maples. Special thanks to Jonathan Browning, Stacey Macken, and Sheila Aly.